We discuss God's origins. We talk about all sorts of stuff here on MythVision pertaining to being a very human development on MythVision. And I've noticed that a lot of people are curious about the origins of Yahweh. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of like question marks. We just don't know too much.
Well, you just read your Bible, Derek. And if
exactly.
you look in Exodus chapter 3, I mean, it makes it very clear who Yahweh is and where he comes from.
I mean, at least from the perspective of that source, you know?
Yeah, of course.
Right.
And that's truly a divine source, so I should just take it at face value. As far as some of the elements we find about the characteristics, if you will, that Yahweh has, is he's like a storm deity. He has some attributes you find in other common ancient Near Eastern deities. I remember reading God and Anatomy here, actually. Right. I love there's certain attributes. I think I might even turn to the page here. Let's see if it's there already saved. But this wasn't it here. Long story short, the goddess Inanna traveled from her temple to Uruk to Nippur in the hope of arousing Enlil. Feigning my father feigns lying down, she cried, may I soothe his heart, may I pacify his liver, may I direct my words to his distressed heart. Sitting on his lap, she sings him awake with the refrain, oh, sleeping one, how long will you sleep? Inanna's lament was considered so powerful that her cult singers recited it in her temple at Uruk on the 7th day, hint, hint, of each month. Don't know why I stopped to emphasize that. In the hope of appeasing the gods for an unknown misdemeanor which might prompt untimely or simulated slumber. Precautionary measures were only sensible. Discerning the difference between a sleeping god and a sulking god was not always easy. Many centuries later, in the 6th century BCE, Yahweh's worshippers were singing petitions to awaken him to the devastating aftermath of the Babylonian attack. Rouse yourself. Why do you sleep, O Yahweh? Awake. Do not cast us off forever. And that's God sleeping, which might be a common thing in the ancient world. I find the 7th day thing kind of interesting as well.
Why did that ever come up in Pat's debate with the 7-day week?
Hey, it has to be consecutive, continuous. It can't be interrupted by intercalendar days or whatever.
Yeah. We got to put certain rules to say how it's so unique. And but my point is, like, there's lots of attributes. You can go to the Baal cycle and you can find Baal as the storm deity who's a warrior god.
Well, I think, I mean, the point to start here is that within the text of the Bible that we have, Yahweh just has all the attributes. But this is looking back from this post destruction, this post Babylonian perspective, where the people who wrote and collected these texts have now, in some respects, been internationalized. They've been exposed to like new ideas and these new perspectives of. But one of the very difficult things in trying to understand who Yahweh is, like getting underneath all that, how do we mine these texts to get back to where Yahweh came from? I mean, unless you're going to accept that he showed up in a burning bush in Exodus chapter 3 and introduced himself not as Yahweh, but as Ehyeh. But yeah, it's really, really complicated. So, he's a storm god. It seems in the early texts, he's similar, I think, to what we read of Baal in the Ugarit text. And this is where scholars have tended to go in their appraisals and their evaluations of who Yahweh was and where he came from. But there's so much that we just don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be able to distinguish between, as Kipp was pointing out, like looking at how the Hebrew Bible tries to work through later conceptions and maybe rework texts and traditions in order to bring those things into alignment, and what happened in early Israelite religion. So when you have Yahweh with this, consort, Shirah, like this is a real thing, right? And I one of the things that I do think is important to point out is these types of later understandings and polemics that we find in the Hebrew Bible that play off of Babylonian mythology, certainly Ugaritic ideas and mythologies. So, for example, looking at how Genesis 1 interacts with the Enuma Elish and concepts that you find in there. And not only is it important to recognize that it is dependent upon and interacting with the Enuma Elish, which, for those that may not know, is the text that comes from, probably the late second millennium, but goes throughout Neo-Assyrian or Assyrian history and Babylonian history, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. It becomes was the center of the Akitu festival, and it was every New Year's this thing got recited and in some ways acted out, but it was a focus. And if you look at how the text of Genesis 1 interacts with the Enuma Elish, it does so in such a way that it demythologizes this battle with the sea concept, where in Enuma Elish, Marduk is coming at Tiamat, who is overpowered and is terrifying the gods, and takes Tiamat down, creates the world through her dead carcass, whereas we do see the actual battle in places like Psalm 104 and other places in the Psalms. Here in Genesis 1, it's demythologized to the point that it's just, Tiamat isn't even really mentioned with this sort of this specific reference to Tiamat, but instead it uses this word Tehom, which is found in many creation contexts and battle with the sea context, but is playing off of this Semitic word Tamtu for the sea, which is what Tiamat comes from. So again, it's all sort of the creatures that we find that are created by Tiamat, that she and her consort Kingu are standing beside and fighting with. They're demythologized now. The Taninim are just these little things that Yahweh plays with in the sea, or Elohim plays with in the sea. And not quite that, but there are these things that's just, it's not that Marduk's, wind has to confront Tiamat in the face to, fill her up so that he can destroy her. Instead, the spirit of, the wind of Elohim,
it just broods.
Broods over the sea, right? And so, at any rate, this is probably going way too deep, but I feel like it's important to recognize that in passages like Genesis 1, and as we can talk about Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 82, these are texts that are engaging with the tradition that ancient Israelite or early Israelite religion had, but doing so in a way that brings it into alignment without sort of just completely supplanting it, which allows us to sort of, peer back behind the cloak and to see what's actually back there.
Probing into Yahweh's dad, El, who's really Yahweh, later.
Weird how it works.
Right? What if I asked you to flip the question on the origins of Yahweh to the origins of El? Do we have a better idea of the origins of El than we do on the origins of Yahweh, or are you not really so sure on that one either?
Yeah, I think El is difficult because it's primarily seen in the Ugaritic pantheon. And while we have lots of texts from Ras Shamra, ancient Ugarit, they're really coming from essentially one time period, right, in the 14th, 13th century. Yeah. And so, I don't know that we have this, not that I know of, have this long tradition where we can go back, because Canaanite mythology, I think, is going to have some connections, obviously, with the Mesopotamian pantheon, but it's going to also be distinct from it. And so I don't know. Mm-hmm. Somebody like Mark Smith obviously would be a great resource to get at that. But of course, El is the head of the pantheon, has the 70 sons, and so this is where Baal and Anat and these figures sort of fall underneath, but creates this very interesting dynamic that we see in places like the Enuma Elish, the same sort of thing where you have a younger deity who's somehow supplanting, being allowed to, or not allowed, but like is elected to rule over them, but yet still not diminishing the senior deities. It's a very interesting dynamic in the pantheon.
You guys just want to sin.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can tell.
Hang on, I got to suppress the truth and unrighteousness. Hang on a second. Okay, got it.
Okay, so since you've suppressed the truth and unrighteousness, we can tell them, like, you guys just made all that up. And then really,
yeah, totally.
What really is going on is, like, there are no real other gods, and, like, there's only one, and it's Yahweh, which is the same guy.
Sorry.
Well, same God. So pretty much we're looking at is, if we want to understand, I guess to ask you both as experts who are looking at the world in a bigger picture, you're not just zeroing in on the Bible. How much can we learn? This is a very generic question, but how much can we learn by reading around the Bible about the God, the attributes, the religion, the practice? Like, I ask this because as a fundamentalist that I still am. Don't tell anybody, because they can't hear that. But as a fundamentalist, I read my Bible because I practically worship the book. And as I started reading outside of my Bible, learning about stories like Romulus, we talked about last night at dinner, or different things, I started getting fascinated. Like, whoa, there's other people who got ascended in clouds well before Jesus, and like cool things like that. So what would you say about that generic question, and go wherever you want with your suppression of the righteousness of God? So
it kind of raises, I got into a disagreement with a guy on Twitter some months ago. And this is sort of, he wanted to take this perspective of the biblical text where, yes, we have all this surrounding ancient Near Eastern literature, and it's useful insofar as we can see how the Bible is teasing out some of the same ideas and some of the same turns of phrase, and the language and stuff helps us understand the text of the Bible, but still had very much this perspective that the Bible's a special book. So anywhere where it looks like, where it looks like what's going on in these ancient Near Eastern texts, you can go to this point and say, yeah, it's just using the language and stuff, but still maintaining this perspective of the text that it's somehow unique, right? And I think, like, I responded at one point to this guy where I was like, you can't learn about what's inside the Bible without actually taking a look at what's going on around it. I mean, it just ends up becoming this circular exercise of using the Bible to interpret the Bible. It's such a closed circle that ever come to learn anything or to see anything that might be there, right? It's the other literature is super, super important because it helps us to contextualize this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess the comparison that I would make is I always go back to music. So there's a difference between, like, if you see if I can do this. Like, if you turn on Kenny Chesney and listen to some songs, and then you listen to like Trace Adkins, or some other country singer. Not really doing too well here, picking up country music.
I'm not sure who they are. Can you sing to us?
Elvira. No, okay, that's somebody different. But so the views just like dropped instantly. But no, like, you could say that listening to somebody who's singing country music, you have a similar genre, or you have the same genre, right? And the songs can kind of sound the same, and you have similar turns of phrase, like "my dog died" or "my truck won't start," but sorry, that wasn't fair. But but that doesn't mean that Trace Adkins is pulling from, or something, Kenny Chesney, right? It's just because they're pulling from sort of stock phraseology, part of the genre. Okay. So that's one type of, it's not dependence necessarily upon one song upon another, but upon the stock phraseology of the genre. Okay. However, if you go, and I always use him, but if you go to somebody like Eminem, and you have Eminem, who is the song About You, I think is what it's called. Yeah, I can't remember. I love you because you remind me of me. That's what it is, remind me. And it's clearly not just pulling from stock, rap phraseology or something, but it's utilizing Joan Jett's I Love Rock and Roll, right? And so there's no way to truly understand what Eminem is doing. It can be an enjoyable song to listen to if you don't know Joan Jett. You can understand it on a certain level, but if you're trying to get, deep into what it is that he's doing with reworking and polemicizing and whatever, you have to be able to understand that it's pulling from and reworking Joan Jett's I Love Rock and Roll. And so these are the two different ways, and there's a spectrum, of course, that ancient texts work with one another and against one another and in light of one another. And so if what apologists want to try to do when it comes to the Bible is to try to go toward the Kenny Chesney, Trace Adkins, and it's just this stock phraseology, and you just have ancient Near Eastern motifs and themes. Yeah, that's true. That does happen a lot, right? Because they're all writing from the same world, right? In the same types of mindsets. But that doesn't mean that you can then say it all functions that way, right? And you do have polemics. You do have intentional reworkings. You do have the Psalm 68, where the rider of the clouds is now no longer Baal, but it's Yahweh, right? So I think we have to be able to come at it from both perspectives.
This is a really demonic thing you just said, so I love it. And so, being funny, Michael Jones does that, which you're describing, a lot, and he's a big fan of trying to do that. And what I find ironic about that kind of conclusion is it's kind of a sophisticated one.
Sure.
It's a clever one. Mm-hmm. Most fundamentalists will try to just deny, not even accept that it's happening. And this happened to me with him in the New Testament. So outside of your specialty, but nonetheless, you're aware of this kind of material. And I want to bring up a highlighted point when we're talking about Greek and Roman legends and myths and you name it, playing a role into the New Testament. He does the same thing he does when he was conversating with you guys on Genesis, where, it's just phraseology used in the air. Duh, they're in the ancient Near East. They're probably conquered by Assyrian and Babylon. Like, how silly. You guys are trying to make a genetic connection. Good luck. Right. And if you try to make linguistic genetic connections, well, I'll just shut those down and ignore them or deny them, even if there is three birds that fly off and there's common, tropes, or even the lie thing you brought up with the, we're going to get into so many different things in your courses. By the way, your course also covers a lot of the ancient Israelite stuff. So both of you have courses. Both of you have YouTube channels. You have books. You'll eventually, I'm sure, be putting out some more book stuff for people. But that was my little shameless plug.
You just got to stop watching The Chosen so much.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're going to have some tainted literature that you might be putting out. And watch when we're reading his book, he talks about, and then the Romans went on and they scrubbed the Hebrew letters from the walls of the... So just making the point, I bring up like antecedence to the Romulus thing I brought up with Jesus' ascension. And it was kind of a funny, we got real comfortable, I think. So he just kind of said what he felt like saying. Well, what would you expect God to do? I mean, if I was God, he said, or alien or something, aliens and gods got mixed into this, but I would come down, and if people already believed in these kind of myths and legends, I would make my character fit within the same trope of it. And Derek Bennett jokingly goes, so the God of the universe couldn't do something different to establish something so radically new and different. I thought it was funny how Derek Bennett kind of played that. Yeah. But he does this where he will say in a sophisticated way, in case we really do get a gotcha kind of thing, well, so what? What would you expect? They got to relate it. They got to use the language. They've got to somehow relate it to their people. That doesn't deny that Jesus didn't actually float up into a cloud.
Right. This is sort of the apologetic
10
approach.
minutes later. No, I'm just kidding.
Of course, we're all friends. I love Michael Jones, and he's a really nice guy.
Yeah.
We all get along really well.
We're jabbing at you, Michael.
Yeah. But, this is something that is, I think it happens of necessity, right? Because if you're starting with the conclusion that somehow in some way, this has to be the word of God, right? And it has to be the inspired word of God. It has to be true in whatever it is, however it is that we're going to ultimately understand this. It has to relay the truth. It has to relay God's message. I think that what ends up happening is in the same way that in Exodus 12:37, when it talks about 600,000 fighting men, and you end up going, wait a minute, like New Kingdom Egypt only has like 3 million people. You can't have everybody leaving Egypt. Then you either have to say the text got it wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe this isn't an infallible inspired text. Or you have to say, maybe it means something else, or maybe we've been mistranslating this, right? And I think that what's driving the direction that you go is the thing that you're starting with, which is your conclusion, unfortunately, in this case.